now is Raywat Deonandan. He's at the University of Ottawa. He's an epidemiologist. We call on him all the time to get guidance and answers to COVID-19 and any outbreaks that take place here. First of all, Raywat, I realize that you come from Ontario, a province that has been hit much harder than COVID-19 compared to Manitoba. So when you see the numbers that we're seeing, there's definitely an increase. But is there anything we need to be super concerned about at the moment in your mind?
As always, we never look at the individual days numbers. We look at the trend. So how are things looking over several days? Now, I'm looking at the curve of Manitoba cases right now, and I see the last couple of days we've seen, an increase in number of cases, and we're not nearly at the same amount that we were back in, say, early April. But I will say that the slope of the curve is what I look at, and the slope right now is, it's got me a little interested. I wouldn't panic or anything yet, but that's what we look for. Is the slope high, and is it continuing to climb further? And as yet, there are no alarming signs. But if you hear my voice, I'm always a little bit on the edge here because at any given moment we have to sort of institute larger and more draconian public health measures in case outbreaks are about to happen. Manitoba, though, has many advantages. The population density, the distance from problematic areas like the USA, and the fact that you've got a good history when it comes to not having strong feeding events like international travelers. So in general, I'm very bullish on Manitoba's prospects.
Now, the province recently has been emphasizing the test positivity rate, excuse me. Raywat, can you explain that for us? Because we're dealing with so many terms here amidst the pandemic that I think it gets a little bit lost. So when they refer to the test positivity rate, what exactly does that mean?
That's the number of tests that we do that come back testing positive for COVID. So if that number is high, it may indicate a number of things. It may indicate that we're not testing enough, or not testing the right way, or it might indicate that the disease really is out of control. So in general, the guideline is if you're getting 5 to 10% or less or 5 to 10% or more of cases coming back positive, you probably aren't testing enough. But if it's under 1% or so, you are testing enough and you're probably capturing most cases. So it's one of the most important metrics. There are both three metrics that I look at in general to monitor our community's performance. One is the number of new cases per day. The second is the reproduction number. That's the average number of cases produced by an old case. And the third is this test positivity rate. So I don't know what the number is right now in Manitoba. I imagine it's less than 2%, which is where we want to be. So that sounds good to me.
Yeah, and just looking at the numbers right now, the current test positivity rate, 1.1% over 5 days. So that seems okay for now. When do we need to start being concerned about that number?
I would say if it gets over 5%, that's when we're in problematic areas. But it depends on the history of the region as well. If you've never got above 2% and suddenly you are, then it's a problem. But again, I'll stress that it also matters how the tests are being deployed. For example, if we're only testing symptomatic cases, they have a higher probability of being positive, so the tests are likely going to come back positive. If we're testing randomly in the population, including asymptomatic people, you have a lesser chance of getting positive tests. So long as the test strategy remains the same, then the trend of the test positivity rate becomes an important indicator. If we're messing with the way we deploy the test, then it becomes, less valid.
Let's take a quick look at the processing plant in Brandon. More than 2,000 people work there. We're only dealing with 10 cases right now, and provincial health officials are saying that those cases are all linked to some community transmission in Brandon, so they were able to test them out. Raywat, help us out a little bit, because we know from past experiences, and I'm thinking High River, Alberta, where they had a plant there that was linked to more than 1,500 cases a couple months ago, and we've seen outbreaks take place at food processing plants in the U.S. as well, and other parts of Canada too. So now we hear these cases not necessarily linked to transmission within the factory, but once it's there, is it only a matter of time before that happens, or can we control this and avoid any larger outbreaks?
I'd be hesitant to use the word inevitable, but there's a strong likelihood that it could spread in a plant, depending upon what public health measures have been put into place. It's kind of like schools. Like the best way to keep schools safe is to keep the community incidence rate low, because that's how it gets into schools. So same with the plant. How did it get into the plant? It came from the community. Depending upon the size and the scope of this plant relative to the size of the community, it may be that so many people work in the plant that if you're going to get a case, it is probably amongst someone who works in the plant just by coincidence. And it sounds like that's what's happening here. However, as you say, once it's in the plant, depending upon the circumstances and behaviors and setup of the plant, it might spread more easily. I'm hopeful that public health is in place in these plants to ensure mask wearing and distancing and hygiene and those things to mitigate or to minimize the probability of transmission.
And so it's obviously bears keeping in mind, but considering the measures and considering the fact that Brandon only has a population of about 50,000 and we're talking more than 2,000 people there, so I guess that kind of answers that question in terms of it's inevitable that, maybe not inevitable, but highly likely that someone who works there, considering the sheer number of employees, would come down with the virus at some point.
That's right. We call that the Texas sharpshooter fallacy in epidemiology, which is a fancy way of saying it's not really a trend or a relationship. It just happens to be a coincidence given the high probability that the people work there. Right. And if you're interested in how we got the name of the sharpshooter fallacy, it's considered you find a target drawn on the side of a barn and you find a bunch of gunshots in the center of the target. You think, oh, the person who shot these things must be a great marksman. It turns out they shot the holes first and drew the targets afterwards. Right. So there's a kind of data bias in place that causes you to make conclusions that aren't warranted. That's not to say, again, that this thing can't go full bore in the plant once it's there, which is why it's important that the measures are in place in the workplace to keep everybody safe.
Raywat, always appreciate your expertise, and I'm certain we will be chatting with you real soon regarding this. But I guess the overall message here is still need to be vigilant, but nothing to panic about right now.
Absolutely right. And Manitoba is doing so well in general, especially compared to Ontario and Quebec, that you should be proud of yourselves and don't panic. Just keep being vigilant. Everybody needs to be vigilant. And if you're doing that, we're going to be fine.
All right, thank you very much. That's Raywat Deonandan. He's at the University of Ottawa, an epidemiologist there. Coming up.